TXVSN TEKS Review Ratings. When reviewing a TXVSN course against the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, or TEKS, a reviewer must be able to distinguish the difference between the ratings of observed, partially observed, and not observed. Let's take a closer look at each of these ratings. Observed. Select this rating if you can see where and how the students can show mastery of course content, and if it is at the correct Bloom's Taxonomy level. In the Electronic Course Submission System, or ECSS, you'll see the target Bloom's level pre-filled for each student expectation. After evaluating the course for this student expectation, you'll make your selection here. Add where you found the evidence in the Where field. You may find evidence in a location other than where the provider indicated, and that's okay. Just mark that standard as observed and indicate where you found it in the Where field. Common places to observe evidence are writing, journaling, and blogging exercises, quizzes and tests, individual and group projects, discussion boards and chats, assignments in labs, and synchronous lessons. Please note that if a student expectation is only assessed in a synchronous lesson, a description of the planned activities and how the students will be assessed is necessary so that you may properly evaluate the course. The lesson must be required and recorded for students who are absent. Complex student expectations. Some student expectations are complex in that they use lists. Some lists contain including, and others use such as. Let's look at the differences between including versus such as. Including. When a student expectation lists several components that are joined by the word including, then it is required that those components must be assessed at the appropriate Bloom's level to be considered observed. For example, take a moment to read this standard. It uses the word including. That means you must observe the Bill of Rights component, and it must be taught at the Evaluate Bloom's level in order to rate it observed. When more than one Bloom's level appears in a standard, the rule of thumb is to evaluate for the highest level shown, and in this case, that would be Evaluate. Such as, when a student expectation lists several components that are joined by such as, then these are considered suggested, and they are not necessarily required. However, the course must still cover that student expectation sufficiently. If a provider chooses not to address any of the components specifically listed in the such as list, they still need to address the student expectation in a different way. If you, as the reviewer, feel that the course doesn't adequately meet the standard, then do not rate it observed. For example, take a moment to read this standard. It uses such as. Such as leads into the list that includes Indian policies, growth of political machines, civil service reform, and the beginnings of populism. If populism's beginnings are not addressed in the course, that's okay. As long as the standard is met with the other content, you can still mark this as observed. Partially observed. As in the example we just examined, at times you may see that a part of a student expectation is met, but part of it is not. What if, in this example, instead of such as, it said including? Now, all of these elements must be addressed at the Analyze Bloom's level. Otherwise, rate it partially observed and write a note in the Where field about what is partially observed. Sometimes a course addresses all of the required elements, but they aren't at the correct Bloom's level. Again, rate the standard partially observed. Not observed. If you cannot find evidence that a student expectation is assessed in any way in the course, then rate it not observed here. You may leave the Where field blank. Alternatively, you may enter a note in the Where field about where you checked for this student expectation. Some reviewers find this useful when completing the collaboration report later on. Please note that the Where field will not be visible to providers.